Hi, this is Carson with Troy, and I have with me Todd Fahnestock. Now, he is a fantasy author, very prolific. Some of his is series, and I'm not going to include them all, but I have a list here: the Eldros Legacy, Tower of the Four, Threadweavers, The Wishing World, The Whisper Print, and then it looks like a couple standalone. Or is the urban fantasy Charlie Fiction? Is that going to be continued on as a series?
Maybe, probably not. For now, we'll just say it's a standalone. Depends on if
Standalone,
news takes me. So
and Summer of Fetch looked like a standalone as well.
definitely a standalone. Yep.
And then you have a piece of nonfiction work that looked like it was about you and your son going on an adventure together,
Yeah.
hiking the
Yeah.
Colorado Trail. I bet that was a special experience for you.
It was probably the one of the best moments of my life. I mean, like it's sort of hard to decide what the best moment. When you've had two kids, it's like, oh well, the birth that was a pretty dang good moment, and then when I got married to my wife, also a dang good moment. So like, there's a lot of really good ones, but man, as far as like rearing children, I think it was probably the moment that I had the largest opportunity to do something good for one of my kids. It was amazing. It was amazing.
That's awesome. Now, you have a book coming up to be released. Now, this will go out probably in January or early February, so this will be in the past for everybody. But the Slate Wizards, which is the third
Gotcha.
book of the Whisper Prince, is coming out December 15th. So if you haven't picked that up, pick that up.
Correct. Yep. It's coming up in just a few, well, for us, time, a few days. For those
Right.
of you watching this like a month or so ago.
So, Todd, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Todd Fahnestock, and I write mostly epic fantasy novels. My branding is edge of your seat, epic fantasy, all of the deep world building, all of the complex characters, none of the boring bits. One of the largest, not largest, but like one of the most frequent comments I get in my reviews is that people are staying up late at night, kind of turning the pages. So I tend to keep things moving when I spin a story. So I've been writing since I was 18 years old. So like good 5, 6 years ago when I started. No. Way back in the dark ages of the 1980s was when I started writing books. And been full time. I've been able to write full time since 2017, and I have 24 books out there at this point. And you mentioned all of the series. That was great. I was very impressed. And I have a few one-offs, but like I said, mostly what I write is what I would consider high fantasy. That is to be putting it as a counterpoint against grimdark fantasy. So grimdark would be like Game of Thrones, right? Where you've got a major character and they might die by the end of the book, right? Whereas high fantasy is more like Lord of the Rings. Like they're going to go through hell and back, but they're probably going to come out on top in the end. Is more high fantasy. So I tend to keep things optimistic. That's my goal and sort of my personality as well. So
Which is awesome. I mean, when you pick up a book like this, I don't know about you, but I was a kid in the 80s and 90s where I was reading Lord of the Rings and Shannara and stuff, and you latched on to characters and you love them and you want them to see him
right,
succeed. So like
exactly.
for people who like that, like your books are wonderful. In my college years, I picked up Game of Thrones, and I like that as well because you never knew if your favorite characters was going to win or not.
Yeah,
And it's a totally different dynamic, but there is something about optimism and knowing like because I don't know about you, but like every character becomes a part of you, right? Like every character, like you latch on to like a little bit of Samwise Gamgee and Aragorn and everything. So like
exactly. Yeah,
to see him lose, like that's heartbreaking. Now, Lee, you said you're kind of you have a people come up to you and tell you that they stay up late because it's such a page turner. Now that is a
yeah.
skill. How did you develop that skill to write fast paced to where like you go through a chapter and at the end of the chapter you want to keep continue reading?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think there are so many different skills that you can bring to the craft of writing. And that particular one, I'm a big believer of payoff. Okay. So if you promise something at the beginning of a book and you don't pay your reader off, you're going to have some angry readers, right? I mean, like, or people will just put the book down. Like, that's the biggest danger these days is actually holding an audience. There's so much competition for your attention in this world that you really have to pay attention to what is it that people want and then delivering what they want. So with that sort of page turner thing, first of all, it's developing credibility with the reader, especially if they don't know your stuff. you need to assure them that you're going to take them where they want to go, right? You're going to take them on a journey that they signed up for. I mean, like if you write fantasy and you are, essentially presenting it as fantasy, part of that is building the credibility, knowing that they're going to get paid off when I bring something up, it's going to show up in the end, and then throwing in cliffhangers at the end of the chapters, right? So you get to a point in the chapter where it's like, you don't know what's going to happen, and then the door opens and so comes in, and that's the end of the chapter. It's like, well, what's he doing there? I got to find out at least a little bit next. And then, you start building that credibility again over the course of the chapter. And then at the end of the chapter, drop another cliffhanger. But the thing is, if you drop a cliffhanger and you haven't built the credibility that you're going to pay them off, then they might get upset and throw the book across the room. It's like, well, he's done 4 cliffhangers in a row and I haven't gotten anything that I wanted yet. I mean, like that's when readers get upset, right? And throw the book across the room. So it's a matter of threading in smaller payoffs to build that credibility and then saving the larger payoffs for the end so that you can build that tension, because it's tension as well. You don't want to just give them everything right up front. Otherwise there's no journey, right? So it's I think in building the skill, it's just try and flex your muscles in that area, I guess is the best way to do it. And then build up those muscles that tell you, okay, you need to give a little something away here and you need to save this. I don't know. I mean, it's an art, right? So sometimes I do it and sometimes I don't. I try to do it every time, but I'm not always successful, but apparently I'm successful enough of the time that that seems to be something that's a general opinion of my stories at this point. I have a great story for you on that note. Actually, I was at FanX in Salt Lake City, and this guy Levi. So, Levi, if you're watching this, hi. I met him for the first time at FanX, and he came up on a Friday, I believe it was, and he bought Kaiven the Unkillable, and it was one of those where when I'm talking to people, like, you never know if I'm a snake oil salesman, right? I mean, like, if you've never met me before, it's like, okay, yeah, of course everybody wants to talk about their books and say how great their books are, but
Right.
like, I told him the story, and told him a little hook for the story, and he's like, okay, I'll get the first one. It was Kaiven the Unkillable, which is the first in the Eldros Legacy. And he's like, okay, I'll get the first one, and he took it, and he went away. And then he came back the next day. He's like, okay, I was up until 3 a.m. reading this. Give me all of them. 6 more books, something like that. He just got the whole thing. So that is one of those con stories that it's one of my favorite moments. I mean, like, what I wrote really got him, and he came back for more. There is no higher praise, in my opinion, for an author. So I was just giddy about the whole thing. I mean, he was a little suspicious to start. Once he got into the story, boom, he was off and running. So I just love telling that story. It's one of my favorites.
That's amazing. And you're right, it is a skill. And I think that for fantasy novels in general, they sometimes don't have that fast pace. Like they get,
Mhm.
it's world building and you get lost in lore and stuff, and which is fantastic. Like you can immerse yourself in a story. But if people that are watching this and want to learn skills like this, like pick up Todd's book to kind of learn, but also like thrillers are really good at this. I love James Rollins' books. I don't know if you know who he is, but like he
Yeah.
he's fast paced cliffhangers every chapter, and you stay up there at night because of it. Thrillers, that's the only thing that comes to mind right now. Like James Rollins. Oh, like the Da Vinci Code. Like Dan Brown
Yeah.
does a good job of that as well. So, as did you learn from anybody, or did you pick up things like that? Like, was there anybody that was
Well,
an example to you?
I think it was, I mean, like, yes. So the answer to that question is, of course, I've learned from so many of the masters that write fantasy. I mean, I've read so many, sort of sinks into you. But specifically, I couldn't point to one specific author that, like, oh, I went to this workshop and like he was talking about edge of your seat epic fantasy. I mean, it's kind of the brand that I've built over time because I don't like to be bored. I am ADHD through and through. And so, like, I got to be entertained all the time. And so, even when I'm writing, pretty much the way that I've elevated my skills is if I've done something that's sort of been done before, I get bored and I don't want to do that way again, right? So I got to come up with a clever way to do it. And so with the whole edge of your seat epic fantasy, and I don't mean to knock standard fantasy or, like, I mean, like the type of fantasy that people are in love with, because I'm in love with it too. And some people really love those drawn out descriptions, the beautiful lyrical prose that goes to describe a castle or a cabinet or whatever it is that they're describing. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but what I have worked on doing is what I call organic weaving of the 3 basic story elements. So plot, setting, character, right? Those are of a story, right? And essentially there was a 2-year period where I workshopped my own stuff with Chris Mandeville. She was very much doing this with me as well. We actually have Chris Mandeville's another author. She writes fantastic young adult stories. She's got a time travel series called Quake, Shake, and Break that is a really great series. But she and I would do this workshop where we would talk about building better beginnings. So the first paragraph of a story is going to be the most read bar none, right? I mean, that's when you get a chance to hook somebody. I mean, used to be you get 50 pages, 50 years ago, you get 50 pages to hook somebody. And then 10 years ago, you get 10 pages. And now it's like, if you don't get them in the first page, you may lose them, right? So the idea was to workshop those paragraphs, those sentences, almost like poetry. I'm not saying write poetry, but I'm saying pay enough attention to it that it's doing exactly the work that you want it to do to get them into the story, right? And you can be a little bit more loose when you get into the story, but in those first paragraphs, like, you got to win them over, right? So that means being able to tell more with less. That's the whole notion of poetry anyways, right? Is you're trying to tell volumes by using just the right word. And like I said, I'm not saying drill down that much, but organic weaving of those 3 basic story elements means that when you write a sentence and all it does is build the setting, you're not doing enough work with that sentence, right? What you want it to do is at least double work. And when you're lucky, sometimes triple work. And that is to say, you write something that illustrates a little bit of the character and also the setting that they're in, right? So couldn't tell one without the other, but then you've nailed 2 birds with 1 stone, right? You've built a little bit of the setting, you've built a little bit of the character. And then the next sentence, you move forward the plot and build a little bit more of the character, do double work there. And then if you see the opportunity where it's like setting, character, and plot all in one sentence. So it's boiling it down to that sort of extract, to that condensation of what you're trying to do all at once. So everything, everywhere, all at once, which actually I just named a movie. If you've never seen that movie, it's a great movie. but I think it applies in this case, at least that phrase applies to writing. I mean, if you're, and again, I can't stress this enough. Like, you shouldn't necessarily be doing it all the time, because then it gets really thick, right? And I'm not a big fan of chewy prose. I mean, I know a lot of people who are very literary want everything to mean so much in every single sentence. I like to provide something that moves quickly and that is digestible, and that people can relax and read. But it's good to have both tools, right? To be able to turn it on when you need to, and then turn it off when you don't have to have it. So I hope that answers the question.
No, that's amazing. And one of the things that I find interesting is when you're talking like developing the plot, character, and setting, like, how do you maintain that throughout the whole chapter? And like, do you outline, do you free write? I mean, coming up with a hook, a cliffhanger, a hook and a cliffhanger all in each chapter is difficult. Are you able to do that on the fly?
Yeah, I am a dyed-in-the-wool pantser. However, having said that, I have done a lot of work trying to be able to plot as well. I am a huge fan of the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Everybody should know that at this point, Star Wars was pretty much built on that template, like the original A New Hope Star Wars, right? I'm also a huge fan of Save the Cat, which was originally a structure for screenwriters, and Save the Cat writes a novel by Jessica Brody. Oh, sorry, Save the Cat was by Blake Snyder, and Save the Cat writes a novel is by Jessica Brody. She essentially took what he did and sort of just massaged it to apply to novels specifically. Both of them are great reads. I mean, the Save the Cat is a classic, and the reason I think that it is so well known and kind of burst out of its own genre, because like I said, it was a screenplay writing how-to, and it nailed story so effectively that it's used. Jessica Brody wrote Save the Cat writes a novel. People were using Save the Cat and then just twisting it and making it fit novels because it understood story so well. So I think it's important, like I said before, with the tools, like, you got to have these tools and be able to turn them on when you can. It's good to be educated about these things. And I'm not saying you always have to use them. I'm not saying follow Save the Cat every single time, although I have for the last like 4 or 5 novels, and you can see my game increasing. I'm getting more awards for what I'm doing. I'm getting better response for what I'm doing. So it's important to understand that. So here's how it goes for me these days. I will use Save the Cat and the beat sheet to kind of lay out the basic structure of a book. I did this with Kaiven the Unkillable. And so they separated into Act 1, 2, and 3, right? So with Act 1, I will lay it out, and I follow that 90%. When I start writing, it's 90%. And then I start writing Act two, and I use about 50% of what I plotted out. And then Act three, about 10%. I mean, like everything gets thrown out the window by the end. But it's a roadmap, and you should use it as you need to. And if you need to go off the main interstate to go off on a little adventure, on side roads and things, you should do that. And in fact, what I love so much about pantsing is that you can surprise yourself, and you can bet your yeah, whatever, that if you can surprise yourself, you're going to surprise readers as well, right? So that's one of the things that I love about pantsing, and why I will never stop being a pantser completely, is because it can bring up stuff that I never saw coming, that my subconscious has been working on and my conscious mind doesn't know anything about. But when I'm writing, it can come out and be delightful, a delightful surprise for the reader.
So it's interesting what I found out interviewing, 50 plus authors, is everybody, like some people will say they're an outliner and somebody will say they're a pantser, and they use the exact same process. Like they'll have bullet points, and they'll use it as a skeleton and then fill it in. And some people will be like, oh yeah, I'm an outliner, I know how I want to start, I know my middle, I have certain guideposts, whatever. And then like I go, and people like you were like, oh yeah, I have certain guideposts, but I'm a pantser because like I don't. It's kind of interesting, the two dynamics, even though they're doing the exact same process. Some people consider it pantsing and some people will consider it outlining. It's
Yeah.
kind of funny.
And the way I used to write, I mean, I had no structure at all. I would start with chapter one, and that would lead to chapter two, and that sort of thing. And I mean, you can write a book that way because we know story. One of the things that Dean Leslie Smith talks about in one of his workshops is that we know story. We've known story since we were 3 years old and we started listening to The Little Mermaid, or whatever it is that we watch in movies, or that our parents read to us, But we just have to get out of our own way. Like, we understand this structure, and if we just relax, it's gonna turn out all right in the end. We'll come around. Now, revision, you may have to cut some things out or whatever. I mean, it's a whole, there are many, many, many variables to writing, and many, many, many different ways that we can get in our own way. The demons that are alive in our head will take an axe to us every chance they get, right? And it can come from any direction, but we understand this stuff. And the more we can get out of our own way, the more we can do it. So the reason that I do structure first and then let myself go is because if ever I get lost, it is quicker for me to go back and touch base with the structure. Whereas in the past, when I would just do this whole novel, I might get 75% of the way through the novel and go, I've gone down a wrong path. I gotta delete, 20,000 words and then rewrite it. Whereas if with the structure, I get to a point, I'm like, this doesn't feel quite right. What did I do in the structure? Oh, and so I don't have to then go back and delete them. So it just makes it a faster process. Not necessarily better, but faster, because there is an advantage to writing that 20,000 words, because then you know exactly what you don't want to do. And when you go and rewrite it, it's going to be far more on point. And if everybody's different. Like, somebody, maybe they could make that on point, call just from the structure. Again, I'm a big fan of saying there is no right way to write a novel. And so if something that I say rings a bell with you, run with it. If something that I say, you're like, oh, that's the biggest piece of tripe I ever heard, that doesn't work, it probably doesn't work for you, right? And you shouldn't use it. I'm not saying, that I know how to write the perfect novel. If anybody knew how to write the perfect novel, they just crank out bestsellers one after the other, these worldwide bestsellers. Nobody knows exactly what to do that. I mean, sometimes you're hot, sometimes you're not, sometimes you're interfacing with the audience, and sometimes they've moved on to something else and you got to scramble to reinvent yourself. All that stuff is in motion all the time.
Right.
So I just think, who are writers and want to do this, you should take it and put it in your toolbox. And maybe you're going to use it every single time you write a novel, and maybe you're going to use it 1 out of 100 times when you need it. Who knows? But it's good to have more tools. I don't think there's ever been a time where I've been like, oh, I have too many tools to use, this is holding me back. That doesn't ever happen.
Right. And one of the reasons why I do this, and if you follow along this journey that I've done, that I've, interviewed so many authors and stuff, and people might get sick of the same questions to everybody all the time. But what might work with Todd might not be work for somebody else. And, everybody has these different talents and different ways of doing stuff. So like, I ask the same questions to everybody because everybody's different, and everybody learns at a different pace, and everybody works at a different pace, and everybody's little habits are different. And so like, everybody has these nuggets of gold that they can get. And so, I ask the same questions every single time to everybody because everybody's different, and what works for Todd might not work for you, and what works for you might not work for Todd. So it's good to get these perspectives from everybody. So you
Exactly.
mentioned, yeah, you mentioned, these tools in your toolbox, and you mentioned something earlier that I want to go back to is tropes. How does understanding tropes help you become a better writer?
So I think at a certain point as a writer, you click into wanting to deliver to the reader what they want, right? I mean, so let's be honest. Like, you don't become a writer if you're not at least a little self-involved. You have to be in order to pull that and create this world. And so much of the first few books I think anybody writes is all the catharsis of getting all that stuff out, right? You're kind of writing for yourself, and you never stop completely writing for yourself, but at least for me, at a certain point, I turned a corner where I'm like, okay, I've done 11 books now, 12 books now, and I know how to write for myself. So now I need to take that skill of being able to write for myself and then start thinking about, okay, how am I going to apply this to an interface that's going to work for someone else, and sort of integrate myself with the readership, right? So so I think that's like a major step. So essentially, once you get to that point, the tropes essentially delineate what audience you're going for, right? Certain people like certain tropes, and that's their candy. And they're not thinking about structure. They're not thinking about the wizard behind the curtain. They just in a house with a monster and find out a way to escape, right? That's the I'm going to use save the cat terms. These are all save the cat genres. He kind of reinvented the notion of genre instead of going, romance novel, fantasy novel, thriller novel. He kind of redefined it such that you could have a romance novel that's actually a monster in the house story. So monster in the house is what most horror movies and stories are, right? Essentially, you're trapped in a place, doesn't have to be a house, but you could be like on a boat at sea, and there's a monster that's there with you and you can't get away from it, right? Like, that's the whole monster in the house. Golden Fleece is like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. It's like there's something that you have to go after and get, and then everything will be fine. It's an adventure. It's a most fantasy novels are a Golden Fleece kind of story, right? Let's see, what's another one? Buddy love, right? Most romance. So he uses buddy love because it can apply to a non-romantic relationship, like say Lethal Weapon, right? That's a buddy love story. Like, these guys are like fighting one another, and they finally get together and they can win the day in the end. That's a buddy love story. But buddy love can also be romance. It's like you got two people that are fighting, and then they're going to get together in the end, except there's sex involved, right? I mean, like, that's what romance stories are. That's that trope. But it's the same. He submits that it's the same trope. It's just two different genres, right? I mean, so, or anyways, it's the same type of story. It's just two different
Size of the coin type thing.
yeah, exactly. So understanding what your audience wants and making sure that you have a checklist that hits those tropes. Okay, hits the trope that they want. So, for example, Kaivan the Unkillable. Let's use a specific example because I find that salient details are easier to digest than just talking in concepts. So Kaivan the Unkillable is a Dungeons and Dragons style epic fantasy. That's not to say lit RPG. It's lit RPG is very specifically like you're building levels, and this is like Lord of the Rings kind of epic fantasy, but it's Dungeons and Dragons style. And by that I mean you've got a party of people, and they do fit those the warrior, the thief, the ranger slash queen, the magic user. All they fit this trope, and they have to come together to figure this out, right? And so when I say that it's a this Dungeons and Dragons epic style fantasy trope, I have created this checklist. It's okay. People that like Dungeons and Dragons, what do they like? They like fight scenes. They like usage of magic. They like a party coming together. They like dungeon crawls. They like lots of creative monsters, right? So I've got this checklist, and if ever I'm like deviating too much into this, oh, there's this relationship between the elf and the human, and and I've gone down a rabbit hole there. It's like, well, that's good, but when's the last time you checked one of the check boxes? Because romance is not necessarily one of those things that you want to check off necessarily in a Dungeons and Dragons style trope. And it's okay because that's my personal flair, and I like a little bit of romance in just about every story that I write. Not a dominant flavor, but like an accent flavor. But if I spend too long, that credibility that I was talking about again, the people came along with me because this was the D&D style fantasy are going to be like, okay, when's the next monster, dude? So you got to make sure you visit that checklist. So that's why tropes are important. It's not that you got to write the same story every time. It's that you got to pay attention to the fact that your reader wants a certain thing. And if you're wanting to interface with that reader, you need to give them that certain thing enough so that they stay with you. And I think everybody has a different writing style. And what you want eventually is a group of readers that likes Todd Fahnestock style, right? So they're going to get into and sort of and learning a style, just like anything, like learning a skill, learning how to play tennis or learning how to ride a bike. Like it kind of is a little strange in the beginning, but then eventually you get to it, and then you really love to run with it, and that's what you want. Nothing else. You want to do nothing else except play tennis, or nothing else except ride a bike. And I think that's a way that new authors can bring readers in. It's like, okay, here's the trope you love, and here's my style of how I do it, and kind of get them used to your style until your style is what they crave, right? That is the ideal. And I don't, I mean, I'm not saying that I've achieved that at this point, but that's the ideal, I think.
No, that's some great advice. One of the books that I love about writing is Drawing on the Power of Resonance by Dave Wolverton, and he talks about
Yeah.
um, how different stories resonate with people, and when you get that resonance out of sync, like it can throw a reader off. So what you're saying is fantastic, and it relates to that. So you said you've been writing since you were 18 years old, and
Yeah.
when you were young, you sold some short stories to TSR in a
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons anthology. As a young writer, like how thrilled were you that TSR, one of the creators of Dungeons and Dragons, like picked that up?
Yeah, I can't even describe, because I mean that was my favorite series at the time, and the idea of being able to write a short story was just it was I was over the moon about the whole thing. There's quite a story to that too. I mean, like everybody asks you, like, how did you get a short story published with TSR, or how did you get this contract, or how did you meet that person? And I wish there was a template for that, but it's so random. And this story will illustrate what I'm talking. Living in Bemidji, Minnesota, of all places. Like, I mean, the far frozen north, right? And in the winter, in fact. And actually, I think this time was more like spring when this happened. Now that I think about it, because I remember there wasn't like just a crazy amount of snow on the ground. But anyways, my mom's boyfriend at the time was friends with this guy named Gary Paulson. You may know Gary Paulson from I think some of his famous books were Hatchet is
Hatchet,
probably one of,
yeah.
yeah, famous books. Dog Song was another big one. But I think Hatchet is his probably most famous book. And at the time, I didn't know who that was. I didn't read that kind of story, right? And they didn't teach it at my school. I think they teach that book at schools, or at least they use it in classrooms a lot. It's a if you've never read Hatchet, I mean, that is evergreen. That is a great story. I read it again not too long ago, and I'm just like, wow, it's just so good. It's such a great story. Anyways, for all ages too, for all ages. And and so mom's like, yeah, I could introduce you. He's an author. I'm like, cool, that'd be great. Because yeah, he may be able to give you some advice on how to get an agent or a publisher or whatever. I'm like, that would be awesome. And so he sets up this appointment where I'm going to drive out. Like everything in Bemidji is like, I mean, like people live in the country up there, right? And so Bemidji is this small town, but like there's a lot of people living. So he lived 11 miles out of town on this back dirt road, right? And so my girlfriend at the time was supposed to drive me out there, and she was a bit of a flake, and she totally flaked on me at the end, and I'm panicked. I'm like, I've got this appointment with this guy in like an hour, and I've got no way to get out there. I worked at the time at the Truckin' Cafe, which was this little truck stop on the highway, and one of the dishwashers said, well, I guess I could do it if you pay me $15. I'm like, fine, I'll pay you $15. Just take me out there. I didn't know how I was going to get back, and that was actually a worry, because walking 12 miles, my word processor was called a Brother word processor. Now, this was in the days before Microsoft had taken over the entire market, right? So it was like this big by this big and this thick. I mean, it was not these little laptops we're carrying around. This thing had to be like 25 pounds, and it had this like steel arm that like you could carry it with. So this was what was portable back in 1990, right? And it had like, it didn't even have a hard drive. It had, you put in discs and you just wrote straight onto a 3.5-inch floppy disk, ejected the disk when it got full, and put in another one. There was no hard drive, right? And it was all just its own brother program. There was no, y'all, you children don't know. You don't even know what we had to deal with back in the day. Anyway, so I get dropped off in the middle of nowhere to meet this guy. And, by then I had done some research. I'm like, this guy is an international bestseller, a New York Times bestselling author, and I'm here with him. And so he invites me to his house. Super cool guy. Sits down. He's like, okay, show me sample your writing. And so I like opened up my little brother laptop. It's not a laptop. My brother word processor, and like I show him my favorite chapter, the chapter that I thought was really good, and he looks at it for this long. I kid you not. He's like, first chapter. And I'm like, oh crap. Like he didn't like it. Okay. So I show him the first chapter and he goes, I'm not kidding you, about that long. He's like, okay. And I'm like, oh well, it was worth a shot, because he stops reading and he's like, you're good. I'll recommend you. I'm like, really? Really? he's like, yeah, but this is not really my genre. Let me connect you with a friend of mine, Margaret Weiss. She does fantasy. At this point, I'm starting to shake. I'm like, wait, Margaret Weiss, like the Margaret Weiss? You're going to introduce me to Margaret Weiss? She writes my favorite books ever, right? And he's like, yeah, I'll just, Anyway, so that's how I got connected with Margaret, and that's how the whole thing began. I sent her
Wow.
5 of my work. She like deleted 3 of them and said, "This is all exposition. Get rid of it." And then she's like, "Would you like to do a short story in this anthology?" And that's how it began. That was my very first introduction to that. So
That's amazing. And it's amazing, like as an author, how far your impact goes. Like Margaret Weiss, like influenced you. Margaret Weiss, I don't know if you know this, but she influenced Jim Butcher when he was in high school. Like it was just a chance meeting, and Weiss influenced him. So like
yep,
just these little outreaches, like in who knows what will come with this interview. It might come to nothing, but somebody might listen to it and be like, you know what, I want to pursue this. So they might be the
right,
next.
right.
Yeah, you just never know. Um, so thank you for that. Now, going back to the beginning, I did not mention one series, and that is the Hearthstone trilogy with Giles Carwin.
Yep.
I didn't mention that. So how how is it different writing with a partner versus, I mean, writing on your own, you're in charge of everything. Yeah. So like, how's
Right.
that dynamic writing with somebody else?
So I think it's probably different with every collaboration that has ever existed. But my experience was with Giles, and we were best friends, right? I mean, we just were like we had done everything together. We grew up in high school together. We went to college together. We lived in close proximity for like 10 years after that. We went on so many different adventures together. In fact, the character Gage in Summer of the Fetch, which is probably 25% autobiographical for me and 75% pure wonderful magical stuff, right? But the best friend character Gage in that is based largely on Giles, my co-author for Hearthstone Trilogy. So my experience in collaborating with him was, I mean, it was like playing D&D with your best friend. Like when you're like making up the stuff in the beginning, it's like, this is wow, this is so much easier and so much fun than doing it on my own, and it went so much faster because we just play off each other. I'd dry up on ideas and then he would like come up with some ideas, and then we would run it up to a fever pitch, right? So that part was other writers in Eldros Legacy, and the brainstorming part is it's absolute heaven. It's like you're playing off one another. Then the writing part was about the same. I mean, like with Giles and I, the way that we did it is he would write the synopsis, I would write the actual prose, and then he would go back and edit the prose, and then I would go back and um, put in more stuff, or pick a bone of contention with what he had added or changed or whatever. And that's where it got sticky. That's where it was less fun, and it put a huge strain on our friendship. By the time we got done with that trilogy, it was unfortunate because I think we created something really great together. But by the time we were done, we were just exhausted and needed to take a break because the beginning, like I said, best thing ever, right? And then you get to the writing part, and that's about the same. And then you get to the editing part, and it is cats and dogs. It's like, no, we needed this part that I put in. He's like, no, I took it out because it's completely irrelevant to what we're trying to do. I'm like, it's relevant to what I'm trying to do. I mean, like those are the kinds of conversations that would start happening. And I remember a specific moment where we had a conversation, and this is back in the day when like we actually had home phones, except they had just lost their cords, so it was like a cordless phone. Woo, really cool, right? Um, and I remember throwing the cordless phone. I had never thrown a phone in my life, but I threw it across the room. It was just that the conversation got so heated that I was just like, I'm done with this conversation. And Laura was like, hey, we just paid $40 for that phone. So I had to go buy a $40 phone.
No, that's unfortunate, but I guess when you're working with a partner, like stuff like that can happen. I mean, you got two personalities trying to tell the same story. It can be rough. Um, and that was picked up by HarperCollins.
Yeah.
That was traditionally published. How has going down the indie path helped you, or what are some challenges with that?
So, um, so I would say like there are bonuses to both sides, right? I mean, big names we know, almost all of them are traditionally published, right? Um, if you think about the names like James Patterson or Stephen King or I mean like these are like Terry Brooks or George Martin, Brandon Sanderson. Like I mean, these are big names that are traditionally published. Although Brandon Sanderson did take a detour recently with his Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
That was quite much. But the cool thing is you're operating with professionals when it's traditionally published. You're operating with professionals at a very high level. These people are very schooled in what they do. I worked with this editor, Bess Cosby, when I was with Tor Books for the Wishing World, and she was magnificent. I mean, like this woman, like we'd met once, and she was so good at identifying and understanding story that she so here's kind of the way it was. I would write this book, and there's a certain part where I'm like, I feel like there could be more here, but this is good. I think it's good. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, right? And she would go straight to that spot without me having said anything and go, you know, you never answered the question this year. I'm like, that's what it is. That's what I needed there. I mean, like she would read my mind and then go further and like give me the editors are like good editors are magic. And unfortunately, there's a lot of bad editors out there, like editors that are like, they say, oh, yes, I'm a good editor. And then they just tear your work to shreds and don't really understand the essence of what you're trying to do. But in my opinion, a good editor, and these are rare, a good editor is somebody that you can, that like sees what you're trying to do and helps you get there, right? They're not trying to enforce their agenda on you at all, not at all. They are trying to make your work more like your work. That's what they're doing, right? And like I said, it's a rare skill, but when it is, it's magic. I think Stephen King was the one that said, "To write is human, to edit is divine." And I know he's talking about those editors, right? And I think as an author, so kind of sliding into the indie side of things, as an author, an indie author, you got to choose your editor. You don't get assigned an editor, and they could be highly educated in as an editor and have lots and lots of skill and lots of experience doing it, or they could be fresh off the editor. I want to be an editor boat, right? You just don't know what you're going to get. And so as an author, as an indie author, you have to be your own CEO. You have to be like, okay, is this going to be good for my writing or is it not going to be good for my writing? And you have to be able to tell people, I'm sorry, we're just not compatible. It's not gonna work out between the two of us. So I'm gonna, do something else. I mean, you have to be able to make those decisions and I think sooner is better than later, right?
Right.
Because I've had a couple where I paid some money to get something done, and when it got done, I was like, I could have done this better myself, which is really what you want to be saying when you get done with. But I have been that is like once or twice that's happened to me. I have been so blessed to work with so many fantastic editors over my career. It's really been a blessing for sure.
Well, like you said, you're in charge of everything as an indie author. How did you go about finding your editor and your cover artist? You got great covers.
Oh, thanks. Well, I can talk about well, I'll get to Rashid in a second, but yeah, my current editor that I do for my stuff is Mandy Haupt, and she's fantastic. Like, I met her through Pikes Peak Writers Conference year after year after year, where we've been in the same circles for a good long while. And she was actually recommended to me by Chris Mandeville, who I had mentioned before, that we do workshops together and stuff. And I was like, oh, I didn't. I mean, Mandy's a writer also. I'm like, I didn't know Mandy edited, and so we connected. And her personality fits my personality well. She likes my stuff. She understands what I'm trying to do with it, and we just got a really good relationship. I mean, stuff like that, like people like that, they're gold. I mean, like you want to
Right.
hang on. So speaking of gold, also Rashid Alakroka is my cover artist, and I tell you, Rashid has helped increase the reach and the visibility of my career. And I just got so essentially, you'll notice I keep mentioning Chris Mandeville. We joke, I call her my avatar because she is like, is interwoven through so many aspects of my career. And we've just been, super good friends for a very long time. We started a writers group, or we met each other in a writers group. I met her at Pikes Peak Writers Conference also, for the very first time. She was the one who got me at the seat at the table when I was talking to Donald Moss, a big high powered New York agent. And he was the one that that sold the Hearthstone trilogy to HarperCollins. So all of that from Chris Mandeville, and also Rashid Alakroka from Chris Mandeville, because her son went to CU Boulder and was either roommates or friends with Rashid, who also went to CU Boulder. And so that's how I got introduced to him. He was an engineer, and in Kuwait, essentially, you go to school for what you're going to do, and then you get put on a waiting list, and then they tell you when your job is available for your particular skill and your particular education, and they slot you into that job. And so while he was waiting, I think it was like a year or even 2 years that he was waiting for this, he was kind of tinkering around with his true passion, which is to do art, right? And so right about there was where I met him, and he was like, I was like, I need covers for my Threadweavers series. And he's like, well, I'll do them. He's like, I'll do them. I'm tinkering with this program, and I really like to try my hand at that. And he's like, I won't even charge you anything. I was like, no, 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 no. Let me pay. I mean, like, you deserve to get paid for your work. Let me pay you for your work. And he's like, well, then just pay me like $1 for each. I'm like, I'm not gonna pay you $1 for each cover. He's like, I just want to like learn this program, and you're kind of like a guinea pig for me. I'm like, let me pay you $110 per cover. He's like, really? Are you sure, man? I'm like, just let me pay you, right? And of course, I'm thinking, there's nowhere I could go to get a cover for less than like $300, right? So
Right.
this is good. It's good for you. Let's just call it good. So, and he's so good to work with. Like, I mean, he really is trying to find, like those good editors I mentioned, he's trying to find the essence of what you're trying to portray. And here's a lesson for all of you authors coming up, right? Be nice to people, treat them with respect and with dignity, because you never know when it's going to pay off. I mean, like, I'm not saying that's the reason to do it. It's good to do it just to do it and to be a good person, right? And like they say that, the guy that, I remember hearing this little anecdote when like a girl's like, oh, well, he's so nice. It's like, well, the guy that's nice to you but not nice to the waiter is not a nice person. I mean, like you have to see how they respond to all people. Like, if you treat somebody bad that you can get away with treating bad, that says something about you, right? So anyways, not to dig too deep into that particular thing, but like,
No, that's
you
great
know
advice, though.
I treated him like a professional from the very beginning. And because of that, we have this fantastic relationship now, that and many other things. Like, we're friends at this point. Like, I would like to think good friends. And I think he enjoys working on my stuff, and I definitely enjoy working with him. But I think that initial first interaction really, like, I think it bolstered his self-esteem on what he was trying to learn at that point. And now you can't get a Rashid cover for less than, like, I mean, like, it's pricey. Like, sometimes, like, there's some stuff that I've done from him that's like $1,500. Like, he can command that because he's so freaking good at what he does. And he's doing other projects that are even beyond doing book covers at this point, like concept art and things for companies that I don't even think he can mention at this point, because the product has not been released yet, right? So it's just, I just enjoy my relationship with him immensely. I mean, sometimes we'll just get on Skype or Discord or whatever, and we'll just talk and talk and talk. I'm like, okay, we should probably get to business at this point. But I can't imagine. I live in fear of the day that I'm not going to be able to have Rashid do my covers. Like, that is a going concern for me, because he exemplifies the character so perfectly well. It's really something. It's a as it is with Mandy, it's like our personalities click, and I just don't know what I would do without either of them. I don't know what I would. Oh, I should also mention, sorry, the Eldros Legacy project. I work with some fantastic editors there as well. Maya Cleve, oh my gosh, Leslie. And now I can't remember her last name. I don't do well with names, but Leslie, you know who you are. And as well as Zach is also really good. He does the final pass on a lot of these, and I'm forgetting someone, and I'm going to regret forgetting them. Oh no, it's always so bad. Like, if I ever had to do like a speech for some award or something like that, I'm literally going to have to write down all the names, because I don't I don't remember them all. So, oh, Rob Howell, duh. Like, sorry, Rob. So Rob also fantastic editor, really good content and creative editor. So, anyways,
Well,
um,
let's talk about the Edra Legacy project, because it's multiple books with different authors, correct? From
correct.
what I was kind of looking, and wrote the first book, and then the fifth book in that series. Is that correct? Or do they coincide together? Are they?
I'm going. So yeah. So okay. So the Eldritch Legacy is a multi-author shared world mega epic fantasy. Okay. So essentially, we've got four founding authors at this point, and they're all creating uh, the meta plot. Okay, so imagine it's like the Marvel universe, right? So let's say I'm writing Captain America, and Mark Stallings is writing Iron Man, and Quincy is writing the Hulk, and Marie is writing Black Widow, right? And at a certain point, they're all going to come together in an Avengers kind of story, right? But until then, we've all got our sort of singular stories going on towards this big throw the ring into Mount Doom kind of cataclysmic ending that we're going to have. We're each going to write about between 3 and 5 books a piece. I'm a little bit faster than the rest of them, so I'm kind of ahead of the curve at this point. But that's the idea. Now, in addition to these, and like I said, we're kind of undergoing a change. Originally, Rob Howell was actually one of the founders. He has since moved on from the group. He's just got so much on his plate. So we're like 4 founders now, moving the Metaplot story forward, and we're actually re-releasing all of them in January. So January 1, there's going to be 9 novels like release order, and now we're going to re-release them in story order. So it's going to be Kyvan, Laurel, and then Ren the Traveler, which is coming out in February. So for those of you who are watching this in January, all these books will be out there as of now. And Ren is coming up. It's coming up on February 1. It's going to be released, or thereabouts. I won't say exactly February 1, but the beginning of the month, the first week of the month, it's going to be released. And that will essentially kick off the metaplot. You read through those 3, and it's going to lead you right into Seeds of Dominion, which is Quincy's first book in Daemonon. Now, the way that Eldros is structured is we've got 5 different continents, okay? So we've got Noxanon, which is my continent, Daemonon, which is Quincy's, Pyronon, which is Marie's, and Draconon, which is Mark's. And then we're renaming the 5th continent, like with Rob's leaving, we're renaming the 5th continent. It's going to be the continent of mystery. So we're going to kind of have some mystery going on there with the origin of the giants. And all these continents cannot talk to each other right now. They've got these dimensional doorways called Thuroi that have been closed for 2,000 years. So I tell you what, let me back up a little bit and give you the hook. This is what I give at cons when somebody asks me what the Eldros legacy is. Okay, so clear the slate. 2,000 years ago, there were this race of intelligent giants, okay? And they ruled the world of Eldros with an iron fist. All of the other races, humans, dwarves, elves, luminants, Shadowvar, all of the other mortal races were slaved to this one master race. Then there was a revolution. They overthrew their overlords, and during the war, 50% of the giants were killed, 50% fled and vanished. Now, when the story opens 2,000 years later, we humans, we have a very short attention span, right? And our memory's not so good either. So it's been 2,000 years, and we don't really think the giants ever existed. So to them, it would be like Zeus and Apollo is to us. We know about them, of course, but did they really exist? I don't think they really did, right? But in the shadows, the giants have not forgotten, and they are building an army that when they're ready to unleash it, it will be impossible for us to stop them. Unless, of course, we have a group of heroes who can do the impossible. This is always when I turn and point at the cast of characters for Kyvan the Unkillable. So that's the hook for Eldros Legacy. And all of these groups of heroes on the continents are going to come together at a certain point. So that's hopefully that's probably more than you wanted to know about Eldros Legacy.
So is this something that you came up with and got these authors involved with, or are you guys just all talking at a con or a round table or online or something? Or like, hey, let's do
No,
this.
I was the Johnny come lately. So
Oh, okay.
I was. So the group of Rob, Quincy, Marie, and Mark had already come together, and they actually had a 5th who essentially bowed out in the 9th hour, said, look, you guys, I got a new wife, I got a new kid. I don't have the time to put into this to do it right. Right. So he gracefully bowed out, and they're like, well, who else should we get? So I was the last that was added. And so pretty much when they were hunting around for somebody, both Marie and Mark were like, oh, we got to get Todd. They called me up and they said, what do you think? I'm like, well, that sounds fantastic. Not ironically, I guess synergistically, I was looking for a collaboration at that moment, and I was trying to cobble one together from like 3 non-fantasy writers, and we had one meeting, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster. It was like this story run by committee, and we ended up with this like half warmed over, half frozen burrito that wasn't really Mexican food, and it wasn't really Thai food, and it was just horrible. It was awful. It was just so bad. And so he called up and was like, oh my God, epic fantasy. I want to do that. That sounds great. And so I dove in and started running from the very beginning. And I had my novel done before anybody else even had half of their novel done, which was really nice. It kind of created this anchor. It's like, okay, we got one book coming out in December. And then everybody else started contributing. But I would like to mention also that we've got our 4 founders at this point, but we also have almost a dozen cohort authors. Now, a cohort author is somebody who's not necessarily involved, that is not making the meta plot, but is like kind of coming in and playing in the world. So there will be like little tangential, moments where they're crossing over the meta plot or maybe meeting one of our characters or something like that. But mostly it's like their own little contained story in the land of Noxalon or in the land of Drakenel. So there's a whole cadre that is waiting for their books to be released. So we're planning to put out one every other month going into next year. That's our schedule. So if you like Eldros, like start with the Khyven, Laurel, and Ren trio. That'll get you sunk into the world, and then jump into Daemonon and sink into Daemonon, because like my third book, Ren the Traveler, takes place in Daemonon. So it's my characters, but I'm writing in Quincy's content into the next books.
Perfect. That's fantastic. Now, also, and you kind of alluded to it, as an indie author, you have to market your books. Right? You have to
Yes.
sell it to make a living. One of those is with at cons. You have like I said earlier, like you have multiple books. How do you match the person that's coming up to one of your series?
So I, a lot of times I don't match them up in the beginning. I essentially, ask them if they're interested in hearing about a book. If they say yes, I mean, I think one of like what helps me bypass that question some of the time, because sometimes I do match them up specifically, and I'll get to that in a second. But most of the time, I mean, if you've ever seen my setup at a con, I mean, you know what you're in for. If you don't know that I'm epic fantasy, you're just not looking hard enough. I mean, like
Right.
I got the guy with the sword, I've got the woman wielding magic. It's epic fantasy all over the place, right? So chances are, if you're not into that, you're not going to come up and say, yes, I want to hear about a story in the first place. So and I usually start off with my Threadweaver's hook. Um, and that is like, I mean, that is true blue epic fantasy, and and so even sometimes people who are not interested in fantasy, I've gotten the pitch down so it's so refined at this point that they might get interested just because it's a good story, right? I've had people do that. It's like, wow, I don't really usually read fantasy, but wow, that sounds great. I'll give it a try, right? I get them kind of into the fantasy genre. But sometimes I'll have somebody who's kind of looking, and they're like, I like, do you read a lot for fun? She's like, oh, I read all kinds of stuff. I'm like, well, what's your favorite stuff to read? That's how I'll qualify. And if they say, well, I kind of like sort of gritty urban fantasy stuff, and I'll be like, okay, come with me over here. Let me talk about Charlie Fiction. This is about a ghost. It's a little grittier than the stuff that I do. It's this time travel novel, and I'll say, read the first 2 paragraphs. If you have to keep reading, it's your book. Or if they're like, well, I liked, Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. I'm like, well, I don't have lit RPG, but I've got this 1980s road trip story over here that if you like the 80s, you're going to dig it. Like I'll find something that is similar to what I'm doing, because I feel like if they can just get in the story, I think I would say 8 times out of 10, I would bet that I could win them over, even if it's not their genre. I bet you I can win them over, and I could be wrong about that, but I've been right enough times that it makes me feel fairly confident. If I can just get them to crack the cover, they're going to have a good time.
Awesome. So 2023 is just around the corner. What conventions are you going to this next year?
So Fan Expo Denver, of course. Fan X in Salt Lake City, of course. Those are Comic-Con, although I haven't gotten my booth for that yet. I probably need to do that. Let's see. Albuquerque Comic Con, I'll be going to in January, actually. So probably right about the time this airs, I'll be at Albuquerque Comic Con. So come by and see me if you're in Albuquerque. And then let's see what else. I'll be going to GaryCon in Wisconsin. I'll be going to Planet Comic Con in Kansas City. And then probably a lot of holiday festival kind of stuff towards the end of the year in Denver. I mean, I did the Christmas market in Denver, and I did the Colorado Country Christmas gift show in Colorado Springs. I'll probably be re-upping for both of those. So lots of stuff in the Denver area because it's cheaper for me to go and do, but I do like to kind of spread things around. And This is big news. Sorry, I didn't even think of this. Is like the biggest news. I will be at San Diego Comic Con
Oh,
International.
nice.
Yeah, I got a table. Well, I got a table. I love to say that. My assistant Becca got me a table at San Diego. I would never have even thought I'd have a chance, and she worked it out and submitted all the right things, and boom, now I've got a table at Comic Con. I've never been to San Diego Comic Con before, like as an attendee or as a vendor, and I am super over the moon excited about going. So see how that goes.
That's awesome. Becca's episode's coming out this Friday. So
Oh, cool! Not only is she a fantastic assistant, she's currently my assistant, but she is an amazing author, and she is coming out with a book for Eldros. I don't want to gild the lily too much. It's called World Breaker, and it is freaking awesome. So if you've read Kaiven the Unkillable, you've got to read World Breaker, because I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there is some crossover between a couple of the characters in Kaiven the Unkillable and Laurel of the Dark, and a couple of her characters. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
awesome. Well, Todd, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, where they can find your books. I
Yeah,
appreciate this so much.
yeah, first and foremost, toddfahnestock.com, spelled just like it sounds. I'm just kidding. FAHNESTOCK.com. And then, of course, on Facebook, Edge of Your Seat Epic Fantasy is my Facebook group. And then Todd Fahnestock, Fantasy Author, is my Facebook page. So any of those places work. I'm also on Instagram because Becca's helping me with that because I'm not as savvy about Instagram as anything else, but she's keeping that alive. And there's some good stuff that comes up on there as well. I'm trying to think of anything else. I do have a Twitter account. I don't spend much time on Twitter, so that's not the best way to get a hold of me. And it's like kind of like the Wild West over there anyways right now, isn't it?
Kind of is right now.
um, so I think those are the best way. Or you can, just send me an email. Just hit on my website and you can send me a direct communication. Or yeah, I almost always respond within 48 hours to somebody messaging me online through Facebook Messenger or Instagram chat or whatever. Any of those is good.
Perfect, Todd. Thank you so much for getting on with me today. I learned a lot, and I know others will as well.
Outstanding. Yeah, everybody get into Eldros Legacy. Ren the Traveler's coming out in just a little while. At least by the time you view this, it will be.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.